Our next panel will focus on vocational and technical education programs as a pathway to success. There's a lot of emphasis that's put on traditional liberal arts education, but there are many opportunities to consider in the vocational and technical space. So let's welcome our experts. First, I'd like to welcome Lebohang Mokwena, the Director of Youth Development Programs at the Vocational and Continuing Education and Training Branch for South Africa's Department of Higher Education and Training. Senthil Kumar, Program Manager, Eastern and Western Africa with the UN ICT Task Force Global eSchools and Communities Initiative. Philip Kwesiga, Professor of College of Engineering, Design, Art, and Technology from Makerere University, and Dr. George Afeti, Executive Secretary, National Inspectorate Board, Ministry of Education for Ghana. And back to moderate this panel, we invite Amini Kajunju.
They're so difficult to work with. Yes. So.
I don't think it's on. Hello? Okay, now it's on. Thank you, Susan.
No, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It's an area that's, it's in great tumult, and
first of all,
a lot needs to be done to preserve the future capital of future generations. And I think we're being summoned.
Hello? Now we're good? Okay. I've had a brief moment to speak to each of our distinguished panelists, and if we don't mind, we'll go on first name basis. Is that okay? I'm really excited to have this conversation because in the last panel, we talked about trends and what were some of the trends in education. And I think one of the current trends is this notion of vocational technical education as an alternative to liberal arts education. And should it be considered as an alternative, or should we figure out a way to sort of bring the two together? And there's also this perception that vocational and technical training is it's not for those who have means or those who can do better in a liberal arts environment, that it's sort of the last option if you have no other option. And we want to talk about that perception, and if that perception is correct, and if it should be continued. But for me, one of the things that makes this topic so important is that when I look at the continent, I look at the infrastructural building that's happening, all the roads and the hospitals, and I'll talk about my country, for example, DRC, where not too long ago, several years ago, the Chinese invested about $6 billion in exchange for resources, obviously, but that $6 billion is supposed to go into roads, hospitals, schools, etc., ports, etc. And my thinking has always been, once the Chinese leave, who's going to fix those roads? Who's going to fix the air conditioner in the hospital when it no longer works? Who's going to fix the incubator in the hospital when it needs to be fixed? Who is going to fix the pothole? Who are the Africans that have the capacity to fix these problems once they arise? I had the pleasure of attending the AU summit last year, and as you know, if you've been to that building, it's a beautiful building in Addis Ababa, built by the Chinese. And as I was just looking up in the ceiling, I saw a gaping hole. Yes, there was a big hole. And the whole time I was thinking, who's going to fix that hole that's in the ceiling of this beautiful, practically brand new building? So for me, technical and vocational training and everything about it sort of involves who's going to maintain and fix the infrastructure within the continent. So without further ado, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to first give us a sense of who you are and tell us about your organization and obviously its relationship to vocational and technical training. And we'll start with you, George, and then we'll go down.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amini. I am from the Ministry of Education in Ghana, but I am here as somebody who has worked in the area of technical and vocational education and training in a number of African countries. So I will be giving you a perspective of the issues and challenges and how countries in Africa are dealing with the issues of technical and vocational education and training. You know that every year, about 10 million young people, young Africans, arrive on the labor market with inadequate skills from various levels of the education system. And this is a real challenge for many African countries. So I've been working with the African Development Bank, UNESCO, and the Association for the Development of Education in Africa, ADEA, to see how countries can be supported to deal with the issues of acquisition of technical and vocational skills in order to ensure that Africans, the young people especially, can get employable skills. The African Development Bank actually wanted to see how a study of what I've done in about 20 countries can be used to shape and inform its funding policies towards support for African governments in this area of vocational and skills training. In the case of ADEA, it was more like a policy dialogue, information sharing, knowledge sharing among African countries. UNESCO, on the other hand, has been looking at how to support policies in technical and vocational skills in especially post-conflict countries. There's a real lot of problems in post-conflict countries. Infrastructure destroyed, you don't have enough teachers, some have been killed and so on. And my work in this area with UNESCO has taken me to countries like Liberia and quite recently to South Sudan to see how UNESCO can support these countries to formulate and implement policies that can deal with the issues of young people getting employable skills for the world of work. Finally, I've been working with the African Union Commission as well. I was privileged to be part of a team that drafted the new continental strategy for TVET to support youth employment.
Thank you. Is this on? Yes. Hello. Good morning. Thank you very much. My profile reads that I'm currently the director for youth development programs. I am not currently the director for youth development programs. I'm actually a full-time graduate student currently, but at the time of expressing my interest in participating, I was responsible for youth development programs in a fairly new government department, the National Department of Higher Education and Training, which was established in 2009, which really saw the bifurcation of what is a single education system, but between two different government departments. One specifically concerned with basic education, the Department of Basic Education, and then one specifically responsible for what we now in South Africa call the post-school education and training system. And the reason for selecting the term post-school was quite specific, that it was not about post-secondary education and training. This is a department that is concerned with creating education and training and skills development opportunities for all South Africans who are out of school and those who are progressing within the schooling system, which is quite a different orientation to then think about a department that is responsible not only for maintaining the pathway, the education and training pathway for those who are within the education system, but how to create ladders for re-entry And so hence the focus again on technical and vocational education and training, on recognition of prior learning, but also on resuscitating and reinvigorating adult education and training, and the establishment of a new institutional type called community education and training colleges. My background was in policy research, but I joined the Department of Higher Education and Training in 2011. Initially to sort of manage the creation or the establishment of a new branch on vocational and continuing education and training, but ultimately then into the role of director for youth development programs. And I think currently it was probably the most exciting time to join the civil service. Really at a time when the country is battling with, or is trying to grapple with the issue of how to reindustrialize, and then how to find a place for technical and vocational education and training, not just as a feeder, but also as one of the ways to stimulate the country's reindustrialization by brandishing a different league of skills, by saying to the private sector, you can invest here now. We're creating the technical and vocational skills that are necessary to drive a new and alternative industrial path. And key expression of this in South Africa now is in what the government calls the strategic integrated projects, 17 really massive industrial projects. And it's really an experiment at creating a new education, training, skills, labor market ecosystem around how do we create a skills pipeline and how do we create young people that are work ready, but also linked to actual conceivable and feasible employment opportunities. And so there's also a huge drive currently to establish a labor market intelligence project in South Africa to try and understand where in the labor market, where in the economy is South Africa creating jobs, and how can we place the education system to be more responsive. It has its own controversies, because ultimately the role of the education system isn't just to be responsive to the economy. There's a social, a cultural, a political mandate to education and training. But I think in the context of South Africa, there's a recognition that for too long there was an under-emphasis on the labor market outcomes and the livelihoods outcomes of young people, and how the education system facilitates and enables that. I'm now sort of in the process of getting out of the actual work in government and then reflecting more deeply around questions of industrial development and skills and sort of education policy. Thanks.
Thank you. Hello. Is it okay?
Should be on. You're good.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Santil Kumar. I work for the organization called GESSI, which stands for Globally Schools Communities Initiative, the entity founded by UN ICT Task Force. And for the past 7 years, I've been based at Africa. Initially, 2 years, I was placed at the Ministry of Education in Rwanda, helping government to build the policy and strategic plan for mainly integrating technology in education space, which also includes the workforce development and the TVET segment of it. For the past 5 years, I've been placed at the Nairobi office, taking care of Southern, Eastern, and West African countries, mainly building knowledge society in African continent. That's the agenda in which we work, and which includes multiple programs. One is African Leadership in ICT program in terms of building leadership capacity for knowledge society advancement, bringing new strategies for science, technology, innovation, and education for a 21st century, and then ICT infrastructure and range of applications, how you bring in for socioeconomic development. And then overall, the skills development. And specific to this panel, it is more appropriate to talk about the skills development program, what we do more specific to the program called Digital Creative Multimedia Project, which is, we talked about some of those liberal arts and the traditional vocational. So we have been doing this project, how you can bring that liberal arts and the technology together, bring the morning panelists talked about, and fireside, we also talked about the value and rich culture in Africa. How you can bring the rich culture through this technology tools to bring the animation and song and music together and create the capacity among the youth to create a marketable product and leverage this, the arts and culture as more of entertainment industry product. So that's one of the programs we are doing currently, and the phase 1 we completed, and phase 2 we are currently engaged with. As a pilot right now, we did only in Kenya right now, so we are currently working with multiple partners to scale up this program across the continent as we do for 16 countries, the leadership training program. So we want to integrate this to continent-wide and take it forward. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Philip Kwesiga from Makerere University, Uganda. And recently we've had a restructuring in the university where we now have colleges. So that means I'm under the College of Engineering, Design, Art and Technology. I've been working with the university for the last 30 years at different levels. And I've also been part of change at the university. Because traditionally, my training is in art and design, and they used to look at it as kind of an aesthetic more than useful. So as a graduate, even my parents were worried what I was going to do at the university with art. But later, they could pat on my back. And that's how I looked at it. Because I looked at art as a kind of creative endeavor. And right back in 1996, we decided to change from the mainstream art to industrial art and design. And that's what turned around what had become almost an obsolete course. With a lot of demand now, we have over 500 students who are different specializations. With that, I was able to introduce new courses, which included jewelry making, fashion, photography, weaving, fabric design, away from the traditional painting, sculpture, and graphic design. I've not only worked with the academic, I've also tried to interface with the public, but also with the kind of private and public community. Because I thought that if we sit in the ivory tower, which is Makerere University, because it had been there and labeled as the Ivory Tower since 1922. I thought it would not contribute anything. But also the university, as part of change, we decided that we should have kind of practical applications in terms of how we deliver our courses. To the extent that, as I speak today, every student at the university must attend, at least in second or third year, some kind of industrial training so that they can be interface with the reality out there rather than sitting in the ivory tower. So the changes that we've tried to make largely have kind of contributed, first of all, to the increased numbers of admission, of students wanting to do art and design, but also on what we are able, our products are able to do out there in the market. And when you visit the city, and I was happy that some of the panelists in the earlier one had interfaced with Uganda, we are trying now to realize that art is a very major part of it, but also the practicality of what we are able to share among our people. And me in particular, because I also have a very interesting edge in terms of ceramics, I've tried to set up kind of centers within the community so that they can learn that our culture is not static about making traditional pots, but rather an improvement that can not only add on to the incomes, but also on the productivity. In terms of curriculum development, I've been very instrumental in terms of how to incorporate vocational training and practical training in re-education right away from the primary. Because I did my research earlier and I found out that the appreciation of arts was very low in terms of looking at art as a tradition or historical kind of input. So when we made those changes, we thought that would then impact more on the community. And I'm happy to share with you this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that overview. Let me start by asking the question. You alluded to this, that there were, Philip, that there were some students that you had an increase in enrollment as a result of offering some of these art-related courses. But let's talk about sort of the perception of vocational and technical training from the youth who we're trying to affect. From where you're standing, from where you are working from, are the youth interested in vocational technical training as a viable path for a career, or do they generally see it as where you go when you can't get into a proper university? And how does that sort of affect how you from a policy perspective, how you work with the youth in helping them understand that this is actually a professional path that's quite viable and important for the economy? Yes, go ahead, George. Yeah.
You were right when you, in your introduction, you mentioned that generally in Africa, technical and vocational education is seen as a reserve for the poor and the less academically endowed. If you look at the figures in many African countries, access and participation rates in many African countries, you'll see that at the upper secondary school level, enrollments in technical and vocational education is less than 10% if you take the student cohort. Only a few countries have enrollments greater than 10%. Mauritius, Rwanda, two good examples. But fortunately, this perception is changing. In fact, I've been to more than 20 African countries looking at their current policies and practices and also talking to young people. And this perception is changing because of two key drivers. The first one is the fact that governments now appreciate that acquisition of skills is a key response to youth unemployment and underemployment. That's the first driver. The second driver is that young people now see technical and vocational education track as more than just becoming a mere car mechanic, hairdresser, or dressmaker by the roadside. Young people are now seeing the opportunities that technology and globalization has introduced into vocational training. Now, many young people now see promising careers in the ICT sector, for example, in agribusiness, agro-processing, in the emerging oil and gas industry in a lot of countries. And of course in the building and construction industry, there are now enormous opportunities for young people compared with young people who go through the liberal education at the university and end up as unemployed people. Now you're seeing a real perception, a change, a paradigm shift in the way young people equip themselves in order to enter into the labor market. So we are seeing changes, but it's also important to realize that in Africa, vocational education and training takes place in different environments, learning environments. We have the public or state schools, we have the private sector institutions, and in some parts of Africa, especially in West Africa, we have what you call the traditional apprenticeship system, where a master trainer will then get a few apprentices and trying to transmit skills to these young people. But that has a problem with the quality because of the different kinds of providers and because of the lack of coherence in training provision. We see that standards, quality, very different from one provider to the other, and this adds up to the negative perception of technical and vocational education, because you get people who say they are plumbers. A plumber from one school may be very good. A plumber from another school is no good. So we have problems. Now, many countries are trying to resolve this issue by creating central, if you like, authorities, training authorities, that can then support some coherence in the system. In other words, you have a central authority that will determine standards, that will look at assessment procedures, that will ensure that the private sector is adequately and properly integrated into training provision. And then, of course, we have the NGOs and the church-based organizations that normally address the problems of slum dwellers, the marginalized, and so on, persons with disability, ex-combatants, and so on. But then we need to get all this together into a coherent system, and that is happening now. For example, in Uganda, we now have the Skills Development Authority. In Ghana, we have the Council for TVET, Technical and Vocational Education and Training. In Rwanda, we have the Workforce Development Authority. In Tanzania, we can talk about the Vocational Education and Training Authority. So we're seeing some movement on the continent towards creation of a system that is not only equitable, but also of high standard, and then driven by a central authority.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. I agree with that, and I think, although in the case of South Africa, I think it's important to realize that while there have been serious perception issues about the value of vocational education and training, these have been about the quality of public provisioning of vocational education and training. There has not been a similar crisis of in young people's desire to pursue vocational education and training if it is offered in private education and training institutions, or if it is actually offered by an education and training provider that is linked to industry. So especially in the South African mining sector, many large mining companies have private training facilities, and that you see quite a serious clamoring for those opportunities. So I think and this is where I think part of the perception issue in the context of South Africa has been. In the context of a changing economy, and where the structure of the South African economy was shifting away from huge industrial jobs and manufacturing jobs to jobs in the services sector, particularly in the financial services, and you're seeing a labor market that is demanding IT skills, high-end, high-level information technology, high-level finance skills, high-level accounting skills. It then became difficult to then create or try to produce mid-level skills for an economy that was actually not absorbing those mid-level technical and vocational skills. So I think the perception issue was then made even harder to address amongst young people when they did not see positive labor market outcomes. What is the point of then getting this qualification in electrical engineering or whatever at a mid-level when the economy is not actually generating the jobs? And therefore, I'm likely then, I have a better likelihood of getting a job if I've been to the university, not understanding that it is about the type of qualification in the university rather than just the value of a university education per se. But I think it is quite nuanced, and that we in South Africa have a huge now career guidance campaign to try and then map different occupations and occupational pathways linked to actual education, training, and skills opportunities to then try and entice young people into understanding that pathway. What's been critical is then linking up opportunity, not just at the level of technical and vocational education and ending it there, but demonstrating how that pathway can and should continue into higher education and training. And opening up that articulation pathway from the community, from the college, and into not just the labor market, but for those students who have the inclination and aptitude into higher education training in technical, occupationally directed fields has been a critical and I dare say a very difficult battle to fight. But it's also about then creating that continuum, which then says to young people, it doesn't just end with a mid-level qualification. I could actually have opportunities and possibilities for advancement beyond the mid-level skills that a college provides.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. In fact, I can cite the Kenya as an example right now, what we are doing. The program Digital Creative Media, it's kind of, traditionally when you call it TVET segment, kind of leftover young talent, fit for nothing. So you need to build some kind of skill set for them to survive in the society. So that kind of tag is gone now. If you can look at, so far in Kenya, only about 70 polytechnics and industrial training institutes. And this year they have announced opening 70 more, which shows that there is a high level demand for the new skill development space. Instead of TVETs or TVSD, skills development space they are bringing in. It's more of a lateral, the kind of accreditation where you can continue to do your additional degree, so that kind of provision. So there are young talent who are really extremely talented and creative. So they don't find a space in this kind of traditional plumbing, carpenters, so that kind of car mechanic kind of space. So that's where we thought, how we could create an opportunity to bring the technology as a tool for them to express their creativity. So we brought in the 4 segment of young talent, team of 4, the graphic, animation and game creation, and the music, then art kind of. So they worked independently, created certain products, and collaboratively they produced a good product. Maybe if you find time, you can go and look at this website called culturalindustriesafrica.org. You may see that it's like a 12 weeks training program. We partnered with one of the Irish university to impart training. And within 12 weeks, the quality of product what this young talent can produce, so you can have a look at it. And as I speak currently, the next set of batch is going through this. We set up the exclusive training facility to all the students, the second batch of students within our organization. And they are creating, so if you traveled across Nairobi, you must have been seeing this Matatu, so the music. So the project what currently they are doing it, jump on board, the Matatu music. So you can see that the different segment of talent coming together, one independently they produce, and then second as a product. And at the next level, we bring in this living lab concept in terms of the policy research practice, so where the government is part of, where we work with the government, not only in Kenya, across 16 countries, more of policy and strategic advisory role. And we are integrating all this learning into the policy, not allowing to be very static what it used to be, and how you can create the opportunity for this kind of new young talent and more enabling environment in terms of the private public sector participation, and also the government creating this kind of the space for this particular new technology-based technopreneurs to come on board. So that's what we are working at policy level, and we started seeing initial success, and we want to work, and since we work with our colleague pointed out about ADEA and African Union Commission, which we actively work with, so we are part of those policy advisory body to take this concrete learning to across the continent. If you look at the market potential, so even if you look at in US, like about 3.6% of your GDP on the entertainment field, and Europe is about 2.6%. In Africa, except Nigeria and South Africa, remaining countries, the culture and industry, that kind of entertainment is not fully leveraged. So how this creative young talent can produce this kind of new available economy? So that's the space we are trying to help.
Thank you.
On the issue of attitudes, in Uganda, it has been kind of changing with time. Because traditionally there used to be only one university, and to get to that university would have been a hell of struggle. What it meant is that then the rest of the people who thought maybe they were not qualified enough to enter the university would have to do some kind of technical course. Mm-hmm. Now, that divide or thinking kind of brought in the thinking that once you don't have a university degree, then you are not as good. But I think with time it has changed so much that as new universities came in, large numbers of graduates were being churned out. Mm-hmm. And what it meant is that the job market required that you need to know some particular skill or something rather than some academic theory of some sort. And most people who had acquired university degrees then had to look for practical skills in order to fit in the job. But also, at the same time, those ones who thought maybe they were not good enough at that time, there was also provision that they could do some kind of upgrading and get some academic qualification. So most sectors like especially the technical, but also the secretarial, most of them now have degrees. And also to fill in that gap, the university thought that maybe we could now create new courses like secretarial studies and all that at degree level. So that kind of flexibility has now changed the attitude. Though, of course, the competition is still there, they still want to go to certain universities, especially Makerere. So, and the other universities have to wait until we have admitted, and then they will also do their admission. But then the job market has found out maybe not only do we get quality graduates only from Makerere, but also we could get quality graduates who have had real practical skills. And the other public university, which is Chambogo University, had a kind of background of a technical, which kind of upgraded. So there were more people likely to, willing to employ people from Chambogo rather than Makerere University. So that meant that even those who had good degrees would have to think of ways of survival. So it is now typical to find some graduate running their own business in the city. But the good idea is that they can still fit in the public and, have a discourse about what happens at whatever level. And those changes have really helped in the way that you don't have to, you can either have it, but also improve on it in order to be a better person rather than just having a paper.
I want to soon talk about privatization and technology as it pertains to vocational technical training, but just staying just a little bit more on attitude and how we can make liberal arts and vocational technical training come together instead of it being such separate disciplines. And let me be clearer. So Tade before mentioned that liberal arts education and the education that used to be provided by some of the major institutions on the African continent was to build the full person and to build, a person who has critical thinking skills, who can discuss various issues that are happening around the world and is capable of being tolerant, etc. That's not always a focus for vocational technical training. My question is, have you seen examples in which these come together? Liberal arts education, vocational technical training are seamlessly merged so that the person experiencing that education is getting the best of both worlds, so to speak.
Well, I can give you an example of what many countries are doing now in this area. There is now the realization that even in the area of technical and vocational skills education, you need a good basic education. Because in the past, we had problems where students were very quickly, channeled into different programs depending on academic ability. This is changing because of the fact that technology now is such that even in the area of technical and vocational skills education, if you don't have a sound grounding in maths, in English, you can read, understand, in physics and so on, you can never be a successful vocational education practitioner. Wow. So this realization has made, this is one reason, in fact, why we are now looking at more and more, let's say, brilliant students getting into the vocational path. And another key driver, which is also taking place in a number of countries, including Ghana, is the fact that we need to also look downstream. What happens next? My colleague mentioned the fact that vocational education has been seen in the past as a dead end. Once you end there, then it means that you don't go any further as you reach a certain point. In Ghana, what we are trying to do now is to see how we can create what we are calling technical universities, which then would provide a logical pathway for people who pass through the vocational education track, but with a good grounding in all the liberal arts. Because a university is a university. You need to really be abreast with some of the general aspects of life, not only to know how to do things, but also to know how to think critically and so on. And these are changes that are taking place on the continent because of the need also for differentiation in provision of education. You know, even at the highest level, at the university level, there can be some differentiation in terms of a diversity, if you like, in terms of the sort of people that the country has need of. Different types of people are needed on the job market. Countries need people who have different abilities, and vocational and technical education is one, but also avenues must be created for the development of such competencies to the highest level possible. I think this is one way where some countries are trying to see how we can merge liberal general education and then also technical education in order to once and for all do away with the negative perception of vocational education training.
Thank you. Thank you. You have any comments? Yeah.
I don't think my response will be as comprehensive, but you know, just as I was exiting from the department, one of the things that we were experimenting with was the inclusion in, we have a sort of exit level secondary school equivalent qualification called the National Certificate Vocational. It's supposed to sort of introduce students to a broad vocational training rather than an occupation-specific program. But, and it was supposed also to have a really strong emphasis on literacy and numeracy skills, really strengthening literacy, broad literacy and numeracy, rather than just as, or rather than solely literacy and numeracy as it relates to an occupation or to a particular job. And as I was leaving, the minister there was a process started to develop a textbook on the economic history of South Africa that would be included as one of the core courses for all the students on the National Certificate Vocational. One of the initial responses from industry, which is arguably the most important destination for our graduates, was you're diluting what they're able to, what the students come out with. They will not come out able to fit and turn and work, you know, strip a car. You're creating airy-fairy, esoteric young people that we must then create, you know, make fit for purpose. So we must still invest in them. So that's part of the trade-off. And you have a lot of backlash from employers increasingly, even for students with a liberal arts education. Employers saying, well, you're too general. You know, you need to know a little bit more about detailed things than this very broad understanding of the world and philosophy. It's not helpful for somebody who's entering the workplace. And that problem is exponentially more pronounced in the context of a technical education and training learning environment.
Thank you for that perspective. You have thoughts?
Exactly the point. This space, the integration of the liberal arts and the TVET was kind of non-existent in the earlier days. Now, increasingly, the technology plays important role in bringing those kind of integration space, and also started seeing the new opportunities for this kind of integration with some of those talent of the combined, for example, the project which I was talking about. The team is setting up separate entity on their own to market all those products, which basically brings all the talent together and create a product, not an isolated silos kind of, which they don't have space for. And this is the new opening right now, emerging, and probably down the line you may see a lot more integration of these, the TVET and TVSD skills development, more on the job, ongoing process, as well as the liberal arts coming together in the future.
Any thoughts?
And because of Uganda, and in particular Makerere University, we've had a kind of thinking that maybe the liberal arts are not very important, even up the policy level, so much that the university or the government supports of students take 75% if you are dealing with science and technology, or if you are doing a science-based course. So you are likely to be supported. So that alone kind of has tried to encourage young learners to pick on those kind of science and technical skills at lower levels so that they can be of benefit if they want to access higher education, because that's where the funding would have been focused more. But on top of that, the university then, as an intervention, we decided that we should have at least the learner kind of interfacing with the reality before they graduate. And that's why we spread out this thinking that at least a student must go in the field. And when they go there, they find that some of the things that they may have learned as theories really have new dimensions in terms of how they can be useful, both for the person but also for the development of the larger community. So those ideas have now been embedded in all the universities that come up as part of a policy which started as the university. But also the Ribo us are also not sitting down. They're also trying to put in some kind of innovation, and that's what we call interdisciplinarity, in a way that we don't look at our own specializations as being separate. If something is happening, though it may be looked at as a liberal thing, it has some kind of underpinnings that may require some practical or technical input. And that's why we are looking at, in particular, our unit, for example, as servicing technology. I don't know, we recently made a car in technology, but then the car didn't look, artistic enough to attract some buyers. So how then do you bring in the other side of the Ribro, where you're looking at the aesthetics and the usage and the ergonomics? So all those have kind of contributed, but also spread, rather than look at something as if it is one-sided. On the other side is that also the innovations have also opened up, thinking that if we have to look at society problems, do we look at one kind of area, or we need to look at the different variables that contribute to the larger issues? And those are some of the innovations that we've been trying at Makerere University. And we have Resilient Africa, which is a project supported by USAID, that they are looking at some of the issues that look at cultures and how people have been using land. But the land has been overused that we get landslides. So how do we make a kind of innovation that will either trigger warnings, or so that we don't have to interfere with the land so much because we are using traditional methods? We're also looking at how do we reach for more people? And I've been behind the larger university program about e-learning, but also mobile learning, because that's also kind of shares information, and we have like an innovation where you can have radio broadcasts using simple things like telephone, so that they can give early warnings to to the farmers, and that so that they can be take care of their resources.
So we're going to go into Q&A, but I have two more questions that I'd love for the panelists to answer quickly. One has to do with technology. You mentioned e-learning. There's e-learning component in your program, Senthil. To what extent has technology helped vocational technical training move forward? And are technical and vocational training classes good online? Can you provide that training online effectively? Would love to get an answer to that question as well. So how technologies has helped this sector. The second thing is having to do with privatization. in the previous panel, there was some discussion about that. That there may be some challenges with privatizing primary and secondary education, especially when you're trying to reach the masses. But does privatization really work for vocational and technical training because of its link to industry? We'd love to get your thoughts on that as well before we go into Q&A.
I'll be very brief on the two questions. First, about the use of online educational resources. We need to recognize that vocational skills training is expensive. In general, it's about 4 times more expensive than general education, simply because of the fact that the equipment and tools that you need for training learners on these things are expensive. So we can leverage educational technologies. Video e-learning materials can be used as a support, but not to replace skills training. Because skills training, to be effective, must be competency-based. You must know not only how to do things, but you must know to do things. And that's a big difference. You have to know to do it. So you can have online resources to support the training. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is that fix this road, fix this machine, and that you cannot get all the competencies and attitudes from just the online resources. Now, if you look at private sector engagement in vocational training, there are examples that have worked well in a number of African countries, especially in North Africa, in Tunisia, in Morocco. We have sort of partnerships between the public sector and the private sector, where the private sector, in fact, the public sector governments have actually handed over the management and governance of public institutions to professional bodies and industry players. So what it means in effect is that the buildings, everything may belong to government, but the principal, the choice of lecturers, the curriculum, all that is driven by the private sector. And this is working pretty well because in one way that relieves government of the cost of technical and vocational skills training. And at the same time ensures that training is relevant to the needs of the labor market.
Thank you.
I think, there are probably 2 things around sort of technology and its deployment in the classroom. The first is that in itself is not an easy thing, that to get lecturers or facilitators within a learning environment that can effectively utilize the existence of technology in the classroom itself requires preparation and training on the part of those lecturers. And often we think we can present a laptop or an iPad or the gimmick and that solves the problem. It doesn't. There's a whole developmental process for the facilitator, the lecturer, that precedes the deployment of that technology. The other thing that I want to say is that, when we talk about technical and vocational education, yes, I can't imagine that, we can have a mechanic whose sort of lectures and whose workshop is streamed via broadband into the classroom. However, there are some vocationally, vocational programs where that might be easier. Students that are doing tourism, students that are doing, so also it's sort of disaggregating the variety of occupations, of trades, and then on the basis of that, determining how far you can extend provisioning or make provisioning meaningful through technology. I'll say just one thing in the context of privatization. I think there's 2 types of privatization. The one is the proliferation of education and training providers who compete with the public sector. And then the other, which is what we've seen in some sectors of the South African economy, it is big industrial firms themselves developing their capacity, in-house training capacity. On the latter, I think generally you have much better outcomes for students. They're absorbed almost immediately into the labor force, but it's probably the best model because there's that iterative process between the theory and the practice in the actual learning and working environment. In the former, one of the problems that we're grappling with in South Africa is around quality and quality assurance, and in actually ensuring that students get back, they get a bang for the buck that they're paying. And that's it's been a difficult part of the education and training landscape to regulate and to sort of bring quality standards into.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think technology plays very important role in TVET segment. Even most of the corporate now started reducing the overall the preparation time for the directly deploying the talent workforce by reducing significant amount of resources by simulating a lot of interactive elements, and when it exactly comes to the hands-on, then they bring in, otherwise they use technology simulation to bring that basic preparatory. Similarly, the TVET segment, if you look at there are plenty of e-learning, digital learning resources coming on board for every stream. So that's one space. And looking at the large-scale delivery, for example, we do this blended learning approach for leadership capacity development, which is an 8-month course, building capacities for African leaders. And so we have the provision to use some of those blended. It is not going to be the exclusive e-learning distance because there is a hands-on experience component involved. So there should be a blended learning approach. And also I agree with my colleague that, so we have done this exercise for Kenyan TVET institutions, the ICT competency standards for TVET lecturers, how you need to build the stage-wise systematic capacity building for them to get used to those technology elements, and also upgrading all the institutions with those technology devices which can enable them to deliver the quality learning for the students, and when they come out of the institutions, better equipped to, ready to employ kind of. And then the part two, the private partnership, public-private partnership is very important, and especially when it comes to revamping the curriculum, industry-ready curriculum, and the private sector plays very important role. And not only that, and also they bring in resources in terms of the corporate social responsibility as well to equip these students. So therefore, partnering at the curriculum and the industry requirement and internship kind of level, the public-private partnership, but it's a long way to go. And every country, the readiness is completely different. There are some countries fairly advanced stage and ready to move on board, and there are other countries still at the basic traditional vocational training level. So the corporate also need to really look at, whenever you go to the ministries, always they look at the government system, any private sector come on board. What is the hidden agenda in which they are coming? So probably the private sector has to be very transparent in dealing with the ministries to get better acceptance.
Thank you.
In Uganda, we have been very innovative in order to kind of bridge the gap between the private sector and public. We've worked with what they call the triple helix, where the private partnership with the government and the university, so that we can chart way forward. And this one helped us to create what we call clusters, focusing on particular kind of skills in what would have been found out to be very important to that community. And one of them is like metalwork, weaving. All these clusters have had inputs involving private sector, the government, and the university. On the other side of using technology in learning, which is e-learning, we've found that it's, of course, not completely to use e-learning as an end itself, especially in communities like Ghana, where access is still limited and all that. But as a kind of complement or supplement to what may be difficult. For example, if you are doing like a surgery, you may demonstrate, an electronic version, which will later at least, so that the more learners are able to share that rather than, learning from nothing. We have also tried to initiate ideas like using problem learning rather than kind of just studying theories. And so the problem learning idea is to make sure that you first find out what is required out there, which most likely is the private sector, because I think right away from 1990s, the most African countries changed from, governments running issues, and there was a lot of privatization. So what it meant is that most of the institutions and structures now lie in the hands of private sector. That gap. That's why we are now trying the triple helix, where we coordinate a way of linking between what are the government policies, what we teach, but also what is practiced out there in the private sector. The e-learning in Makerere has been very successful in a way that we had earlier had distance learning, which used paper, and we used to call it yellow paper because you still give the same notes, 20 years down the road. But with the e-learning, it allows you to improve and add on to what you share with your learners in order for them to learn, almost up to what is now currently taking place.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll now open it up to Q&A. And, oh my goodness. Okay, yes.
Thank you very much for this panel. Thank you. My name is Levi Zangai, and I run a community college in West Africa. Before I tell you the country, I've been here 3 months. I'm from Liberia.
Got it. Got it.
The topic of technical vocational education is very important to us, and I wanted to find out how other countries in Africa, especially George, have been handling it. For us in a post-conflict and hopefully post-Ebola era, TVET, Technical Vocational Education, is an investment in the peace process. We have a population that is 66% under the age of 25, and we have had political instability for the last 25 plus years. So education is extremely limited, but the young population needs to be empowered to take advantage of employment opportunities that have been created. And we have been lucky to have co-training partnership in the TVET program with some of the multinational corporations on a volunteer basis. And I emphasize volunteer because I want to find out if other countries are doing something that George mentioned, the government give it to the multinational. Part of our challenge is to make sure that we change our manufacturing practices. As you know, many African countries have raw materials, and they usually send those directly from the ground, if it is mining, or logging timber on the ship and export them. And then we import manufactured things like tires, we got rubber, we got cocoa, we got iron ore, but we don't manufacture anything. So one of our challenges is to have the government require, and I don't know how that is done, that semi-manufacturing products are shipped instead of raw iron ore or raw rubber or whatever else is raw timber. We add some value to them so that our students who we are training in these skills will have job opportunities. And I like to see how that has been handled in other countries. Right now, it's been done on a volunteer basis. We train people in partnership with the companies, but we do not have a mandatory law that says the company must help us and they must not just export raw materials. So value-added manufacturing is a challenge for us in our part of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take 2 more questions and then we can answer. Wow. Oh, okay. Okay, we'll go to the...
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ife Awag from Nigeria. My concern and question is from the 2 speakers, from Mokwena and Kwesiga. I hope I got it right. From your response to the first two questions, my concern based on what is obtainable in Nigeria today, I wonder whether it's enough to train the students in the vocational skills. How far do these institutions go? Because if you, Mokwena, when you were speaking, you say that the manufacturers or the industries were like, it's too broad, the curriculum is too broad if you have to include liberal arts. My issue there is, if you do not include that, unless, I don't know what is obtainable in your country, when these people have the technical know-how, how do they go around the managerial skills and the ethical issues? Because this is the major concern in Nigeria. It's not enough to train somebody as a good plumber or a good electrician. You can fix the tools very well. But how do you relate with your clients, your employees? If you're self-employed, how do you negotiate? You know, you have to be a good person. You have to be a person of character first before the skill, your technical know-how in the skill can work for you. So this is what is basically lacking in my country. It's just a few of them, those vocational or technical schools, very few of them that are affiliated to the institutions that inspired. You know, you heard when I said Pan-Atlantic University when Tade was talking. That university or any affiliate is, the foundation is ethics. You can't do much without ethics. And that is what is lacking in most of those schools. What you sell, I don't know whether you're doing it, but if you are, how can this be done? That is what I think is very key in bringing about the transformation we are talking about. Thank you very much.
We'll take one more question from this side. Yes, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Barbara Simmons. I'm Dean of International Education at William D. S. Tubman University in Liberia. I've been here 3 months also. I'd like to hear from the panelists their thoughts on the notion of having education push for STEAM, STEAM standing for science, technology, engineering, entrepreneurship, the arts, and mathematics.
Okay, okay. Okay, unfortunately, those will be the last questions that we can take, so please.
Well, Amini, I think with your permission, we can pick and choose.
Yes,
time, right?
yes, absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Let me just take the question posed by my colleague from Liberia. The question has two sides to it. The first one is that if you want to be able to process primary commodities, then you need to have people who have the skills to do that. Now, these are higher level skills that normally you would have in polytechnics and other higher education institutions. Unfortunately, what is happening in most African countries is that you don't have the teachers and the instructors who themselves have the expertise, the technical know-how to be able to train young people in these areas. So that's a key problem that African governments have to address. The other side to your question is that governments have to create the enabling environment for these things to take place. Because if you have economic policies that promote the establishment and expansion of enterprises, which may include processing of primary commodities, then this will give opportunities to training providers to train the people to do the job. So there are two sides to it. We need to get our governments to act quickly and in the right direction, and also to ensure that we have the teachers who can teach these things.
Thank you very much. I think if I can just add a little thing. You were looking for sort of practical examples of countries that have attracted investment, but with a view of expanding their manufacturing base and sort of beneficiation. Maybe not so much sort of mineral and resource beneficiation, but I think Singapore did that for a long time. They didn't have the skills, but they said, we'll create the tax and investment incentives, but there's a sunset clause to this special position that you have, and on condition that you train our workforce, such that once you're done, once you leave, we have created the capacity ourselves to take over and to run those, and they've done that quite successfully. On the issue of ethics, morality, the inclusion of sort of liberal arts within technical and vocational education, I'll deal with the first. I think that's where professional bodies are so key in setting up some of the ethical standards and the professional standards that are necessary in a particular occupation or a vocation. So, for instance, for chartered accountants or for engineers, I think the role of professional bodies, on the one hand, it's to, give accreditation and to give professional designation. You are now a designated engineer, but on the other hand, it is to deal with some of the ethical, the softer issues that I don't think the education system is necessarily always best placed to deal with. But when you have a body of professionals who want to maintain and protect the esteem of that profession or of that occupation, they're best placed to do that. And you see that happening well, particularly in the legal and the accounting fraternities. I think that model can be applicable in other occupations and vocations. With regards to STEAM and the inclusion of the arts, we spent a wonderful time this past summer a lot of time actually at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that came up over and over was around how, particularly in the context of Africa and its development now, how we talk about development not just as the hard mineral extraction industrial policy, but also around the artistic and the spiritual life of Africans, and how the education system itself has to, in some way, incorporate that. I think it's harder. I find that having worked in a government department, really our performance was measured on policies that make our graduates palatable for industry, and industry saying, what do you call this? No, we really don't need them to philosophize. So it's about, the social utility and the cultural utility of education and making a business case for that. And I think that is hard to do. And I think, I'm not sure what country has grappled with that meaningfully or very well. I'd be welcome to suggestions and sort of examples.
Thank you.
Thank you. So one of the areas where the Africa really missed out is the industrial economy. So therefore, they're really looking at how this agricultural-based economy directly leveraging the knowledge-based economy range. So instead of relying this mineral export, and those, while parallelly plenty of industries, they're trying to attract for those investment. And that's one area where there's a new set of skills, the knowledge-based, economy-based. Every African country is talking about the vision of building a knowledge-based society. If you look at out of 54 countries, all their vision document talks about building knowledge-based economy. So therefore, one is to look at how, with the current context, the available talent, you can use most of it, so that therefore, one area they can really focus at this point of time. And even, so coming to the second question, like we train those talent and they're really qualified, but they don't know how to work out their effort estimation to build a case. How much should I ask for this? So how you can build this add-on skill set, therefore, not limiting to only the technical talent, but also the managerial ability to make sure that, they can able to run their business effectively. So, and also the another project we are currently doing in partnership with the MasterCard Foundation in Tanzania, not to STEAM, only to STEM right now. And maybe you can look at it, so strengthening innovation practice and secondary education in our website. You may find some more detail about it. Thank you.
Philip, you have the last word.
In the case of Uganda, we try to kind of have all these combined together, because when we are looking at technical and vocational education, we add also the business, so that the learner or the person who picks the skills knows how best to kind of negotiate, but also plan for what they are doing. And we are putting even it to the last person, especially the farmer, who needs to log in the inputs and outputs in order for them to understand, the economics behind that. So there is a whole range of thinking that, we're looking at skills development as a kind of combined rather than selective in terms of how we administer our programs. The person who was inquiring about how we do it is that we constantly review what we have done. And for example, we have the next one, which is a 10-year development plan from 2011 up to 2020, which will look at how business, technical, and vocational education can be looked at in the next 10 years.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, this, I think, was a very informative conversation. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists.